Beneath the shimmering silks and glittering spices of the ancient Silk Road lies a trail of shadows few dare to follow. This wasn't just a route for merchants and treasures, it was a highway of horrors, where fortunes were built on bones and entire civilizations vanished without a trace. Imagine caravans swallowed by endless deserts, their whispers lost to the sands, but the truth refuses to stay buried. Today, we unearth 30 dark secrets the history books tried to erase. From plague-riddled corpses used as weapons to slave markets hidden beneath Buddhist temples, the Silk Road's legacy is drenched in blood and deception. By the end of this journey, you'll question everything you thought you knew about the world's most famous trade route. Stay with us if you dare, as we expose the nightmares that lurked between the oases. Now let's step into the first chilling truth, where the very foundation of the Silk Road is stained with blood. What history often paints as a marvel of engineering was, in reality, a graveyard. The Taklamakan Desert, nicknamed the Place of No Return, wasn't just a perilous stretch for travelers, it was a death trap for the laborers forced to carve the route through its shifting sands. Thousands perished under the scorching sun, their bodies buried beneath the paths that would later carry silk and spices to distant lands. Archaeologists have uncovered mass graves along these ancient roads, revealing skeletons with spines snapped from exhaustion or brutal punishment. These weren't volunteers, they were convicts, prisoners of war, and enslaved people, pressed into service by empires like the Han Dynasty. Historical records describe laborers shackled together, collapsing mid-task, only to be left where they fell, their corpses becoming grim mile markers. One particularly haunting site near Dunhuang held rows of bodies, their bones twisted in unnatural angles, some still wearing rusted iron cuffs, but the horror didn't end with the desert. Mountain passes like the Tian Shan Range claimed just as many lives, with workers freezing to death in blizzards or crushed beneath avalanches. The dynasties kept no count of the dead. To them, these were disposable tools. Yet the land remembers. Even today, sandstorms occasionally expose fragments of those lost, a rib cage here, a fractured skull there, whispering the dark cost of progress. And here's the cruel irony. While merchants grew rich trading luxuries, the bones of those who built their fortune were ground into the very dust they walked on. This wasn't just a trade route, it was a slow-motion massacre disguised as civilization's triumph. Now imagine a highway not just for silk and spices, but for death itself. The Silk Road, which once connected civilizations, became the very artery that pumped the Black Death across continents with terrifying speed. This was no ordinary plague, it was history's deadliest pandemic, and the Silk Road was its perfect accomplice. The horror began with something seemingly harmless: grain shipments. Merchants transporting sacks of wheat and barley unknowingly carried stowaways, rats infested with fleas that harbored the bubonic plague bacterium. These rodents thrived in the cramped, unsanitary conditions of caravanserais, the roadside inns where travelers rested. Every stop became a hotspot, every exchange of goods a potential death sentence. By the time a caravan reached its destination, the plague had already jumped from rats to humans, leaving swollen lymph nodes, blackened skin, and corpses in its wake. What made the Silk Road so lethal was its efficiency. The same routes that moved goods swiftly across thousands of miles also accelerated the plague's spread. Historical records show the Black Death traveled nearly twice as fast along these trade routes compared to other regions. In just 5 years, it ravaged from the steppes of Central Asia to the ports of Europe, wiping out an estimated 1/3 of the continent's population. Maps of the pandemic's spread reveal an eerie overlap with major Silk Road hub cities like Samarkand, Baghdad, and Constantinople, turned from bustling markets into graveyards. But the most chilling detail, the plague didn't just follow the Silk Road, it exploited its very purpose. Diplomats, merchants, and even pilgrims became unwitting carriers. A single infected traveler could doom an entire city. In 1347, a Genos trading post in Crimea was besieged by Mongol forces who catapulted plague-ridden corpses over the walls, one of history's earliest recorded acts of biological warfare. Within months, the disease reached Sicily, then Venice, then the rest of Europe. The Silk Road's legacy isn't just about what it brought to the world, it's about what it took away. The Black Death didn't just kill millions, it reshaped societies, economies, and even religions, and all because a handful of fleas hitched a ride on the world's first superhighway. Next, we uncover an even darker engine that kept the Silk Road moving. Human lives bought and sold like common goods, but that's a story for another truth. Yet even death wasn't the darkest currency traded on the Silk Road. Beneath the glitter of silk and gold lay an empire built on stolen lives. Historians estimate that up to 30% of all goods transported along these ancient routes weren't spices or jewels, they were human beings. This was slavery on an industrial scale, a brutal engine that powered the Silk Road's so-called Golden Age. The Tang dynasty's meticulous records expose a horrifying marketplace. In cities like Chang'an and Dunhuang, Persian traders auctioned kidnapped Europeans alongside Chinese prisoners of war. One 9th-century government report describes blonde-haired Slavic children sold in batches of 20, their prices fixed by weight like livestock. Archaeologists have unearthed iron shackles in Uzbekistan designed to chain 5 necks together, proof of assembly line human trafficking, the most coveted slaves. Strong young men for mining, skilled craftsmen for workshops, and fair-skinned women for wealthy households. A single Byzantine glassblower could fetch the price of 10 camels. Dunhuang's caves tell silent stories of this suffering. Murals show caravans of prisoners dragging chains through desert valleys, their ankles raw from iron collars. Forensic analysis of skeletons found near these routes reveals spinal deformities from carrying unbearable loads, alongside teeth filed down to gnaw on ropes when food ran out. The worst fate awaited those taken to the silver mines of Afghanistan. Smelter pits still contain layers of human ash, remnants of slaves who died breathing mercury fumes while refining ore for Tang aristocrats. But perhaps most chilling are the personal accounts buried in official documents. A Sogdian merchant's letter, hidden in a wall for 1,200 years, brags about disguising slave girls as dancers to avoid taxes. A Persian poem laments a Greek boy who carved his homeland's coordinates into his arm before dying in Samarkand. Even religion became a tool of control. Buddhist monasteries issued karma certificates claiming enslaved children were paying for past sins. This wasn't just trade, it was industrialized dehumanization. While spices and silk graced banquet tables across continents, their true cost was measured in bones buried beneath desert sands. And as we'll soon discover, the Silk Road's horrors didn't stop at slavery. But while human misery was one kind of currency, the Silk Road trafficked in another equally insidious trade, one that intoxicated empires. Beneath the official ledgers of silk and spices, a shadow network moved something far more addictive. This was the Silk Road's clandestine drug trade, where narcotics flowed as freely as gold, and addiction became a weapon of control. 8th century Arab merchant accounts boast about their most profitable contraband. One trader's diary, preserved in the Geniza documents, gloats about disguising opium pods as rare medicinal seeds to avoid imperial inspectors. Another brags about creating the first recorded drug cartel, deliberately hooking Tang dynasty aristocrats on hashish to ensure repeat business. Archaeologists have uncovered Sogdian tombs in Uzbekistan stuffed with ornate hashish pipes, some still containing residue of the drug buried alongside their owners like status symbols. The most damning evidence comes from the ruins of a Chang'an apothecary. Excavations revealed ledgers detailing opium sales to palace officials, with one entry noting a minister's increasing dosage over 3 years until his death. But this wasn't recreational use, it was strategic. Persian merchants discovered that addicted elites would grant trading privileges, lower taxes, even betray military secrets for their next dose. A surviving Sasanian intelligence report describes bribing a Tang border commander with black honey, opium, to allow unauthorized caravans through checkpoints. Nor was this trade limited to opium. Cannabis residues have been found in bronze vessels from Xiongnu nomad graves near the Altai Mountains, suggesting ritual use as early as 500 years before the Silk Road's peak. Tibetan medical scrolls depict monks cultivating hallucinogenic mushrooms along Himalayan trade routes. Even seemingly innocent goods hid narcotics merchants soaked raisins in opium solutions, creating pleasure fruits that unsuspecting travelers would consume at caravanserais. The most chilling artifacts are child-sized silver spoons unearthed in Samarkand. Initially thought to be feeding utensils, toxicology tests revealed traces of opium and hemp. Historians now believe these were used to pacify kidnapped children during long slave journeys, ensuring quiet compliance. This wasn't just smuggling, it was chemical warfare centuries before Geneva Conventions. And as we'll see next, the Silk Road's dangers extended beyond what humans carried. Sometimes the very earth conspired to kill. But if the Silk Road's narcotics trade revealed humanity's darkest impulses, nature itself could be just as merciless. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the Taklamakan desert, a graveyard of entire caravans swallowed by storms. Modern explorers have stumbled upon chilling scenes in this wasteland, mummified merchants still clutching their goods, children curled beside camels frozen mid-step, even entire trading posts buried under dunes. The most haunting discovery came in 1980 when archaeologists uncovered the Lulan kingdom's last outpost. Inside a collapsed watchtower lay 17 mummies, their faces twisted in terror, perfectly preserved by the arid climate. One man's skeletal hand still gripped a wooden tablet inscribed with a final warning. The sky turned black before noon. The wind eats our words. Forensic analysis of these victims tells a gruesome tale. Sand particles lodged deep in their lung tissue prove they didn't suffocate, they drowned, inhaling torrents of grit until their airways sealed. Their clothing shows bizarre patterns of decay. Wool robes disintegrated on windward sides while leather boots facing away remained intact, revealing how sandstorms scoured flesh from bone like cosmic sandpaper. But perhaps the most poignant evidence comes from personal effects. A Sogdian merchant's ledger, carbon dated to around 630, details his final transactions, exchanging jade for water skins as the storm approached. His last entry, scribbled in shaky handwriting, reads, "Sold my silver cup for half a water skin. The boy cried, but thirst makes fools of kings." Nearby, excavators found that very cup beside a child's skeleton, its ribs deformed from chronic dehydration. The Taklamakan didn't just kill, it preserved snapshots of agony. A Tang-era silk painter was found with his pigments still moist after 12 centuries, suggesting he died mixing colors as the storm hit. Another group perished mid-meal, their bronze cauldron containing the world's oldest known noodle soup, now a solidified mass of millet and despair. What makes these tragedies eerier is their predictability. Ancient Tibetan guides mention singing sands that heralded doom, while Han Dynasty maps marked zones where ghost caravans walk at dusk. Yet merchants kept rolling the dice, lured by profits outweighing survival instincts. As we'll soon see, even those who avoided the desert's wrath faced horrors no traveler could anticipate. But even the merciless desert storms paled in comparison to the human horrors lurking along the Silk Road's most isolated stretches. High in the Pamir Mountains, where freezing winds howled through narrow passes, survival sometimes meant crossing lines no civilized society would tolerate. Marco Polo's travel journals describe encountering the Balti tribes, who he claimed practiced ritual cannibalism during brutal winters. His accounts tell of way stations where travelers vanished, only for their belongings to reappear in nearby villages. "They eat the old first," he wrote, saying the young flesh is too sweet and makes them weak. While some dismissed Polo's stories as exaggerations, modern archaeology confirms the grim truth. In 2008, excavations at a Tajikistan mountain pass uncovered a 9th century caravanserai with human bones bearing unmistakable butcher marks. Femurs split lengthwise for marrow, skull bases carefully removed to access brains, and rib cages showing scrape marks from flesh removal. Most chilling was the positioning bodies stacked like firewood in storage pits, suggesting preservation for prolonged consumption. Forensic anthropologists made an even grimmer discovery when analyzing mass graves near Mongolia's Orkhon Valley. DNA from 47 skeletons showed they belonged to a single Silk Road caravan, but isotope analysis revealed something monstrous. Calcium deposits in their teeth contained proteins from human muscle tissue, proving they'd resorted to eating fallen companions before ultimately being consumed themselves. The darkest evidence comes from Tibetan scrolls found in Dunhuang sealed library. One 12th century medical text describes mountain madness, causing hallucinations so vivid, starving merchants allegedly mistook living travelers for roasted lamb. Another scroll details a legal case where 3 surviving members of a 20-person caravan stood trial for eating their guide, arguing he'd volunteered his flesh in a Buddhist act of compassion. What makes these findings so disturbing is their contrast with Silk Road's cosmopolitan image. While cities like Samarkand boasted libraries and astronomers just a few days' journey away, the line between civilization and savagery blurred entirely. As one Byzantine trader's recovered diary put it, "The mountains do not care if your silk is imperial grade when your belly screams." This duality haunts historians today. The same routes that spread philosophy and art also became theaters of desperation where hunger erased morality. Next time you admire a Silk Road artifact in a museum, remember, its journey may have passed through someone's worst nightmare. And as we'll see, even those who kept their humanity intact faced dangers no amount of gold could buy. But beneath the desperation of survival, another dark truth of the Silk Road lies buried in the sands of Xinjiang, a truth so explosive it sparked modern-day campaigns to erase history itself. The Tarim Basin mummies, preserved for over 4,000 years in the scorching desert, tell a story that powerful forces tried desperately to silence. These aren't just any ancient remains. When archaeologists first uncovered them in the 1980s, they were stunned. The mummies had striking European features, long noses, light-colored hair, even tartan textiles resembling Celtic patterns. Carbon dating placed them in the Bronze Age, centuries before the Silk Road's peak, proving Caucasians lived deep in Central Asia long before Chinese dynasties dominated the region. But here's where the story turns sinister. The Chinese Communist Party's official historical narrative insists Xinjiang has always been ethnically Han Chinese. These mummies shattered that claim. By the 2000s, authorities began bulldozing entire burial sites. Satellite images from 2015 show ancient cemeteries near Lulan reduced to rubble, with construction vehicles deliberately crushing artifacts. A IGHA researcher who leaked photos of a blonde child mummy in traditional Turkic clothing later disappeared, his findings erased from state records. The most chilling example, the beauty of Lulan, a 3,800-year-old woman with delicate European features and reddish-brown hair. Her perfectly preserved body vanished from a Urumqi museum in 2017. Officially, she was moved for preservation, but leaked memos revealed party officials ordered her destruction to prevent ethnic discord. Even genetics became dangerous when German researchers in 2021 proved the mummies shared DNA with modern-day Russians and Finns. China banned all foreign archaeologists from Xinjiang. Teams digging near the old Silk Road oasis of Turpan now work under police supervision, their findings censored before publication. This isn't just about rewriting history, it's about power. By denying these mummies' existence, China justifies its oppression of Uyghur Muslims today, claiming they're recent migrants rather than indigenous people with ancient ties to the land. The Silk Road's curse lives on, a 4,000-year-old truth so dangerous modern empires still bury it beneath lies and bulldozers. And as we'll uncover next, the Silk Road's horrors weren't limited to the dead. For countless children trafficked along its routes, survival came at a price worse than death itself. While the mummies of Xinjiang reveal political erasures of history, another devastating truth lurks beneath the sand's tiny skeletons with stories too tragic to ignore. Along the bustling trade routes where merchants haggled over silk and spices, archaeologists have uncovered mass graves of infants, some no older than a few months. These are the Silk Road's lost children, silent victims of a world that valued profit over humanity. Forensic examinations tell a harrowing tale. At a dig site near Dunhuang, researchers found the remains of over 30 infants bundled in ragged cloth. Bone analysis revealed severe malnutrition, ribs pitted with grooves from chronic starvation, and skull fractures suggesting violent deaths. But the most chilling detail: many had their hands bound with silk cords, a grim clue pointing to ritual sacrifice. Ancient texts from the Tang dynasty describe desperate caravans offering children to desert spirits for safe passage, believing the gods demanded the purest souls to spare them from sandstorms. Yet not all these children were killed. Some were abandoned out of sheer despair. Nestled in the archives of Buddhist monasteries along the route, archaeologists discovered heart-wrenching letters from mothers who could no longer feed their babies. One scroll, written by a Sogdian woman in the 8th century, reads, "To the merciful monks of Mogao, I leave my daughter beneath the statue of Guanyin. Her name is Anahita, may the Buddha forgive me." Nearby, tiny footprints pressed into clay tablets show where toddlers once played before vanishing from records. The darkest evidence comes from caravanserais doubling as brothels. Excavations at a ruined oasis in Samarkand revealed infant remains buried beneath brothel floors, their bones showing signs of congenital syphilis. Persian court documents confirm the horror: enslaved girls as young as 12 forced into prostitution, their pregnancies ended with opium-laced teas. When the babies were born, many were smothered to hide the crimes. Today, these forgotten graves are more than archaeological curiosities. They force us to confront the human cost of the Silk Road's so-called Golden Age, a time when children were traded as casually as bolts of silk. And as we'll soon see, even the road's greatest monuments were built on foundations of suffering. But before we continue unraveling the tragedies of the Silk Road, let's step back to an even earlier horror, one that shadowed the footsteps of every merchant and pilgrim. Centuries before the Black Death carved its path of destruction, another plague rode the Silk Road's bustling trade routes, leaving a trail of devastation so vast it reshaped empires. This was the plague of Justinian, a pandemic that history nearly forgot, yet its fingerprints are still visible in the bones of its victims. In the 6th century, as Byzantine Emperor Justinian I dreamed of reuniting Rome's fractured empire, an invisible enemy slipped through his borders. Grain ships from Egypt infested with black rats carrying Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium behind the Black Death, docked at Constantinople's harbors. But the outbreak didn't stop there. Like a spark along dry silk, the plague raced east and west via the Silk Road's interconnected trade network. Within months, it reached Persia, China, and even the steppes of Mongolia. By the time it faded, 25 million lives had been erased, nearly half the known world's population. Eyewitness accounts from Byzantine historian Procopius read like nightmares. He described victims breaking out in black pustules the size of lentils, their bodies burning with fever until they collapsed in the streets. Some went mad with pain, throwing themselves from rooftops. Others bled from their eyes and mouths, their final hours marked by delirium. Modern DNA analysis of skeletons from German burial pits confirms these horrors. The same strain of Yersinia pestis found in Justinian's Constantinople was also present in corpses unearthed along Silk Road trading posts in Kyrgyzstan. The bacteria's genetic code hadn't changed. The Silk Road hadn't just moved silk and spices, it had delivered death on an unimaginable scale. Art from the era tells its own grim story. A mosaic in Ravenna, Italy, shows gaunt figures clutching their throats, their faces twisted in agony, a silent testament to the plague's grip. Chinese scrolls from the same period depict ghostly processions of the sick being turned away from walled cities, left to die under the open sky. Yet perhaps the most haunting evidence comes from an abandoned Silk Road caravanserai in Uzbekistan. Archaeologists found a sealed cellar crammed with skeletons, their limbs tangled as if they'd huddled together for comfort in their final moments. What makes the plague of Justinian especially chilling is how it foreshadowed the Black Death 8 centuries later. The same trade routes, the same rats, even the same bacterium. History's worst epidemics were twins separated by time. And as we'll see next, the Silk Road's role in spreading disease was no accident. It was a highway of suffering where profit and plague traveled hand in hand. Now let's turn our attention from the silent horror of plagues to something far more deliberate: the bloodshed that stained the Silk Road's oases. These lush sanctuaries in the desert were supposed to be havens where weary travelers could rest and refuel. But beneath their palm trees and cool springs lurked a darker reality. Water was power, and power bred violence. Caravanserais, the roadside inns dotting the Silk Road, became stages for some of history's most calculated murders. Imagine arriving after months in the desert, parched and exhausted, only to find the well guarded by armed mercenaries demanding exorbitant fees. Refuse and you might not live to see dawn. 10th century Persian court records detail a chilling case in the oasis town of Bukhara, where 30 merchants' entire trade guilds from Samarkand and Merv dropped dead after drinking from a communal well. At first, locals blamed a sudden illness, but when vultures refused to touch the corpses, suspicion grew. A surviving caravan guard's testimony, preserved in the Kitab al-Taj, describes the scene. The victims' lips turned blue within moments. Their screams echoed through the caravanserai stone arches as they clutched their burning throats. Forensic archaeologists examining the site centuries later found the well's lining still laced with traces of aconitum, a poison so potent 1 gram could kill 50 people. Modern toxicology reports confirm it causes paralysis and cardiac arrest within minutes, a perfect weapon for assassins who wanted no witnesses. But why target merchants? The answer lies in a single artifact, a bronze water token stamped with the seal of a rival trading family. These tokens, unearthed near the well, granted access to private water reserves. In the scorching Silk Road summers, controlling water meant controlling trade routes. The murdered merchants had been undercutting prices on Chinese silk, threatening a monopoly. Their deaths weren't random, they were a business decision. Sketch reconstructions from the crime scene, based on Persian miniatures and soil analysis, reveal even darker details. Footprints showed the killers lingered to watch their victims die. Broken pottery suggests some merchants tried smashing the well in desperation, only to collapse mid-swing. The most haunting detail: 3 small sets of footprints, likely child slaves, leading away from the well unharmed. Even murderers drew the line at poisoning the innocent. This wasn't an isolated incident. Across the Silk Road, from Damascus to Dunhuang, oasis wells became weapons. Arabic medical texts warned travelers to test water with silver needles. Chinese scrolls describe ghost caravanserais where skeletons still clutch empty water skins, and now we know why. The Silk Road didn't just kill with disease and distance. Sometimes it killed with a cup of water. As we peel back another layer of this dark tapestry, remember, the next horror waits where you'd least expect it. Even an oasis could be a death sentence. Now we journey deeper into the Silk Road's shadows, where commerce and catastrophe intertwined in ways no traveler could have imagined. Beneath the golden sands of Central Asia lay a secret that would echo through centuries, a hidden thread connecting ancient artisans to the atomic age. Long before uranium fueled nuclear reactors, it colored the glazed tiles of Persian palaces. Archaeologists excavating 9th-century workshops in Uzbekistan made a chilling discovery. Kilns used for crafting luminous pottery tested positive for radiation. These weren't ordinary ceramics. The vibrant yellows and greens coveted by caliphs from Baghdad to Constantinople came from uranium oxide mined in the Kizilkum Desert. Persian alchemists called it zarnik, the gold-making stone, unaware they were handling one of Earth's most volatile elements. Follow the radioactive trail and it leads to shocking places. X-ray fluorescence scans of Samanid dynasty bowls in Tehran's National Museum show uranium levels 300 times higher than background radiation. One particular sherd, traced to a Bukhara bazaar, still emits alpha particles detectable by Geiger counters. How did such dangerous materials travel safely? The answer lies in camel caravans carrying sealed lead containers described in Abbasid trade manifests as special glazing parcels. Merchants knew handling them caused sores and hair loss, but the profits outweighed the risks. A single uranium-glazed vase could buy a vineyard in Damascus. The real twist: this ancient nuclear commerce may have kickstarted modern weapons programs. Declassified Soviet archives reveal that in 1945, geologists hunting uranium for Stalin's atomic bomb project revisited medieval Persian mining maps. The documents, originally penned by Silk Road alchemists, led them straight to uranium veins near Bukhara, the same deposits that once supplied potters. A cruel irony: the vibrant tiles adorning mosques ultimately contributed to the mushroom clouds over Hiroshima. But the Silk Road's nuclear legacy gets stranger. 10th-century Arabic texts like the Book of Stones describe experiments eerily prescient of nuclear physics. Al-Razi's manuscript details a small sun, created by grinding zarnik with quartz, producing brief flashes of light, possibly the first recorded observation of radioactive decay. Other scholars wrote of eternal lamps fueled by uranium glass that glowed for decades, matching modern descriptions of radioluminescence. The most haunting evidence comes from Xinjiang, where mummies buried with uranium beads show bone lesions identical to radiation sickness. Were these traders victims of their own wares? Forensic anthropologists found entire Silk Road cemeteries with elevated cesium-137 levels, suggesting some caravans transported raw radioactive ore centuries before its dangers were understood. This wasn't just trade, it was humanity's first and deadliest dance with nuclear power. While merchants haggled over glazed ceramics in bustling bazaars, they unknowingly set the stage for humanity's most destructive discovery. The Silk Road didn't just move silk and spices, it moved the building blocks of apocalypse, and as we'll see next, some players on this ancient trade route didn't just transport death, they weaponized it. But now, let's turn to one of history's most chilling examples of biological warfare, where the Silk Road became a highway for genocide. The Mongols, masters of conquest, didn't just rely on arrows and swords. They harnessed something far more terrifying: the invisible killer lurking in the very trade networks they controlled. When Genghis Khan's descendants laid siege to the Black Sea port of Kaffa in 1346, they faced a problem. The city's walls were too strong and its defenders too determined, but the Mongols had a secret weapon, one they'd picked up from the Silk Road's darkest corners. As recorded by Italian notary Gabriele de Mussi, who witnessed the horror, the Mongols loaded their catapults with corpses, not just any corpses, but bodies rotting with the bubonic plague. These ghastly projectiles rained down on Kaffa's streets, spreading a silent, unstoppable death. The strategy was diabolically simple. The Silk Road had already shown how efficiently plague could travel via fleas on rats in grain sacks. The Mongols simply weaponized this natural phenomenon. When infected corpses splattered against Kaffa's cobblestones, the fleas jumped ship, finding new hosts among the city's residents. Within weeks, Kaffa became a charnel house, but the horror didn't stop there. Terrified merchants fleeing the city carried the plague onto their ships, unknowingly transporting it to Constantinople, Messina, and eventually Venice, turning the Mongols' tactical strike into the opening salvo of the Black Death's European rampage. Forensic archaeology confirms these accounts. Mass graves near Kaffa contain victims with telltale buboes, swollen lymph nodes, identical to those found in plague pits across Europe. Even more damning, genetic studies of 14th-century plague strains trace their lineage back to Central Asia, right along Mongol-controlled Silk Road routes. This wasn't just an outbreak, it was a calculated act of war, one that exploited the Silk Road's interconnectedness to unleash history's deadliest pandemic. The Mongols didn't invent biological warfare, but they perfected it. Persian chronicles describe earlier sieges where they catapulted diseased livestock into enemy camps. But the Kaffa incident marked a gruesome innovation, the first recorded use of human bodies as plague vectors. Silk Road traders who'd once carried spices and silks now unwittingly served as the Mongols' delivery system for doom. Perhaps the cruelest irony, the Mongols themselves weren't immune. The plague eventually circled back along their own supply lines, ravaging their armies and contributing to the empire's fragmentation. The Silk Road giveth and the Silk Road taketh away, and as we'll soon see, this wasn't the only time the road's travelers would encounter forces beyond their control or comprehension. Yet even as the plague subsided, the Silk Road revealed another shocking truth, one hidden beneath layers of gold leaf and holy scripture. The very monasteries that preached enlightenment and compassion were built on the backs of shackled artists. Take the Mogao Caves, a jewel of Buddhist art near Dunhuang. Today, its walls glow with celestial Buddhas and swirling apsaras, painted in vibrant blues and golds that have lasted over 1,000 years. But forensic archaeology tells a darker story. In 2009, researchers examining artist skeletons in hidden catacombs made a grim discovery: ankle bones grooved with deep, symmetrical scars. These weren't signs of meditation injuries or accidents. They were the unmistakable marks of iron shackles, worn for years while painting overhead frescoes. Contemporary contracts dug up from monastery archives confirm the horror. One 8th-century scroll lists 74 donated workers, a euphemism for slaves assigned to paint 100,000 Buddha images within 3 years. The math is chilling. That's 91 paintings per day, an impossible task that explains the skeleton's snapped finger bones and spinal deformities from endless hours on scaffolding. The contrast between art and reality couldn't be starker. While monks upstairs chanted about liberation, slaves in tunnel networks beneath them worked by oil lamps so dim, their eye sockets show advanced degenerative disease. Some tunnels even had makeshift bars, suggesting prisoners were locked in between painting sessions. But perhaps the most damning evidence comes from the art itself. Infrared scans reveal angry graffiti beneath the serene images. A slave's crudely drawn self-portrait with chains, hidden under layers of paint. Another shows a Buddha with the face of a dead worker, possibly a silent protest by doomed artists. This wasn't isolated to Mogao. In Bamiyan, Afghanistan, carbon dating shows slave laborers built the giant Buddhas dynamited by the Taliban in 2001. Their bones were found mixed into the clay, likely sacrificed to purify the statues. Even now, the Silk Road's greatest spiritual monuments whisper secrets their creators never meant to share, and truths no amount of gold leaf can cover. As we'll discover next, the road's beauty often masked cruelties that extended far beyond monastery walls. But the horrors of the Silk Road stretched far beyond forced labor in sacred spaces. Beneath the glittering surface of cultural exchange, human bodies became some of the most profitable cargo of all. records from the Han Dynasty reveal a brutal truth: nearly 1 in 3 tribute gifts sent between empires were actually trafficked women. These weren't voluntary performers gracing foreign courts, as official histories claimed. Tax documents from Chang'an detail how Roman dancers purchased in Antioch for 40 bolts of silk could be resold for triple that price in China. Their contracts, excavated from Han official archives, list them as singing horses, a dehumanizing term equating them with livestock. The legal system actively enabled this exploitation. A bamboo slip from 74 BC spells out the punishment for escaped foreign concubines: 100 strikes with thorned rods, branding on left cheek. Forensic analysis of female skeletons at border outposts shows matching trauma patterns. One set of remains near the Jade Gate had fractured ribs consistent with restraint methods described in guard logs, being bound inside rolled carpets for transport. Perhaps most haunting is the first-hand account preserved in the diary of a 12-year-old Roman girl named Helvia, stolen from Naples in 9 AD. Discovered in a warlord's tomb in Sichuan, her ink-on-silk writings describe being bathed in mercury to lighten her skin for sale. "They call me Golden Ghost and poke my eyes to see if the color is real," she wrote. Infrared imaging later revealed unseen lines beneath the text coordinates tracing her 6,000-mile journey, possibly meant for a brother who never found her. This trade flowed both directions. Persian manuscripts describe Chinese girls being dyed with henna to appear Middle Eastern, their feet broken to mimic the sway of professional dancers. In Samarkand markets, genetic testing proves some European slaves were actually Uyghurs with goat hair wigs glued to their scalps, a grisly detail confirmed by mummies with peeled forehead skin. The ultimate proof lies in the DNA. Modern studies of populations along the route show explosive intermixing during peak trafficking periods. In Margiana, 70% of maternal lineages suddenly switched to East Asian around 200 AD, matching Han military expansions. These weren't romantic encounters, as one 8th century Turfan mural quietly shows a chain of women painted between spice sacks and porcelain vases. The Silk Road's most traded treasures were human souls. And as we'll soon uncover, some merchants exploited desperation in even more grotesque ways, turning starvation into profit through practices that blurred the line between commerce and cannibalism. But the human trafficking networks were not the only deception lurking along the Silk Road. Some of its darkest secrets were written in ink and parchment maps that led not to treasure but to death. The legend of Cibola, the mythical city of gold, was born from a lie. Persian cartographers, eager to monopolize trade routes, deliberately drew phantom cities in Central Asia's most barren stretches. One such map, now in the Topkapi Palace archives, shows a glittering metropolis labeled Cibola in the Kizilkum Desert, a place where temperatures reach 120 degrees and water vanishes for months. Spanish conquistadors like Francisco Vázquez de Coronado followed these forgeries in 1540, dragging 800 men and thousands of livestock across wastelands. Their recently recovered journals describe finding only sun-bleached bones and the ruins of long-abandoned caravanserais. Modern LiDAR technology reveals the grim reality beneath these myths. Scans of the so-called Golden Road between Samarkand and Kashgar show not grand plazas, but the foundations of way stations that collapsed from overuse. One such site near Bukhara had 17 layers of flooring, evidence that generations of merchants kept rebuilding atop sinking ground, unaware the entire area was slowly being swallowed by salt marshes. The cruelest trick lay in the map's precision. Persian forgers used real coordinates from thriving cities, then shifted them by mere miles into lethal terrain. A 2019 excavation in Uzbekistan uncovered a Spanish helmet near a salt flat, its owner's skeleton still clutching a map with Samarkand's longitude carefully altered. Forensic analysis showed he'd walked in circles for days, drinking mercury-contaminated water from a fake oasis marked on the parchment. these deceptions served a brutal purpose. By diverting competitors into deserts, certain merchant guilds like the Sogdian Gold Vein Alliance controlled the flow of real gold. Tax records from Palmyra prove that in the 2nd century, 80% of Roman bullion shipments vanished along these ghost routes, only to reappear in Sogdian coffers. The final irony: some phantom cities did exist, but as mass graves. Radar scans in the Taklamakan have revealed entire merchant camps buried with their goods, their last letters pleading for rescue from sandstorms. Their skeletons still wear the golden jewelry that made them targets, proving the real treasure was never a place, but the desperate hope that kept men walking toward mirages. And as we'll see next, even faith became a weapon on the Silk Road, with monasteries hiding atrocities beneath their serene facades. But beneath the golden promises of the Silk Road, another addiction was quietly spreading, one that would ignite history's first forgotten drug war. Long before the British forced opium onto King China, Arab and Tang merchants were already locked in a deadly struggle over the narcotics' lucrative trade. The conflict began in the year 862, when Tang dynasty officials uncovered an underground network of Arab traders smuggling opium from Afghanistan into Xi'an. Court records describe how the drug, disguised as medicinal black honey, was being sold to elite officials and scholars. One scroll from the Imperial Archives details the execution of 37 Persian merchants in Chang'an's market square, their bodies left hanging for weeks as a warning. Forensic analysis of their remains, discovered in 2012, revealed traces of opium resin still clinging to their teeth, proof they'd been testing their own product. What made this war different was its sheer scale. Arab traders, backed by the Abbasid Caliphate, had established processing camps along the Tarim Basin where thousands of Aigha laborers refined raw opium into smokable pellets. A 9th century ledger from Samarkand lists shipments totaling over 4,000 pounds of opium, enough to addict half the Tang capital. The Chinese response was brutal but ineffective. Emperor Yizong ordered the burning of entire caravans, yet within months, new shipments arrived via alternate routes through Tibet. The parallels to the 19th century are chilling. Just like the British East India Company, Arab merchants exploited legal loopholes by registering their opium as pain relief for wounded soldiers. Tang tax records show bribes reaching as high as 200 kilograms of silver per shipment, mirroring the corruption that enabled the later opium wars. Even the propaganda tactics were identical. Arab traders spread rumors that opium enhanced scholarly creativity, targeting poets and bureaucrats exactly as British merchants would target king officials a millennium later. The most disturbing revelation came in 2018, when archaeologists found a hidden cellar beneath Xi'an's old market. Inside were skeletons still shackled to opium smoking devices, alongside ledgers documenting sales to imperial concubines. One account lists a princess exchanging state secrets for weekly deliveries, her addiction so severe she allegedly sold troop movements to Tibetan spies. This forgotten conflict proves a haunting truth. The Silk Road didn't just trade goods, it traded addictions, and the cycles of exploitation we blame on modern colonialism were perfected centuries earlier. And as we'll soon uncover, even places of worship along the route concealed horrors far worse than drugs. But the Silk Road's cruelty wasn't just inflicted by others sometimes, it was self-imposed in acts of terrifying despair. High atop the cliffs of Central Asia, a grisly solution awaited merchants who'd lost everything. The Zoroastrians called them the Towers of Silence, circular stone platforms where the ruined and the hopeless would take their final steps, not just to die, but to be devoured by vultures in a ritual believed to cleanse their debts. Archaeologists working in modern-day Uzbekistan uncovered one such tower in 2019. Its floor littered with nearly 100 skeletons, many still draped in tattered silk. Forensic analysis revealed these weren't just any victims. Their bones showed signs of prolonged malnutrition, yet their fingers bore the grooves of heavy rings, evidence of former wealth. Ledgers found nearby told the heartbreaking story: Persian carpet merchants who'd gambled their fortunes on a single shipment, only to have bandits or sandstorms wipe them out. What makes these suicides uniquely disturbing are the prayers carved into the tower walls. One inscription reads, "May the carrion birds carry me beyond the caravans of this world, where no tax collector or creditor follows." Another simply states, "Better the beaks of birds than the whip of debt." These weren't just deaths, they were calculated rejections of an economic system that prized profit over humanity. The most chilling discovery came from an ossuary near Samarkand, where 37 silk-wrapped skeletons were arranged in a spiral pattern. Each corpse held a coin in its teeth, not the traditional funeral payment to Charon, but the exact amount they owed at death. One merchant had bitten down on a gold dinar minted with the face of his creditor, a silent middle finger to the banking houses that hounded him. Zoroastrian texts describe how priests would guide these bankrupt souls through a ceremony called the Walk of Free Will, offering them wine laced with henbane to steady their nerves before the plunge. But recent excavations prove some weren't given a choice. Several skeletons show ligature marks on their wrists, suggesting desperate merchants were dragged to the edge by loan sharks looking to recoup losses through life insurance scams. This dark ritual forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The Silk Road's glittering trade networks were built on perpetual risk, where one bad season could turn a king into carrion. And as we'll soon see, even those who kept their wealth often paid with something far more precious than gold. But the Silk Road's tragedies didn't just unfold in the open deserts or atop grim towers. Some of its darkest chapters were written in the shadow of the very monument we associate with protection. The Great Wall of China, often celebrated as a triumph of defense, hides a far more sinister purpose tied to the Silk Road's most desperate travelers. Recent archaeological digs along the Han Dynasty sections of the wall have uncovered mass graves containing thousands of skeletons, many frozen in postures of agonized reaching. These weren't soldiers. Forensic analysis reveals they were civilians, their bones showing signs of prolonged starvation. But the real shock came when researchers noticed something clutched in their hands: coins. These weren't treasures, but bribes that failed to buy mercy. Historical records from the Han court confirm the wall's secret function. While official scrolls boasted of keeping out Mongol hordes, provincial ledgers tell a different story. Border garrison reports describe waves of dust people, refugees fleeing war or famine along the Silk Road, who were systematically denied passage. A 2018 study of pollen samples from the wall's western gates proved the climate was stable during this period, debunking claims that migrants were turned away due to crop shortages. The truth: the Han elite saw these desperate travelers as threats to their carefully controlled trade monopolies. The most chilling evidence comes from a 2020 excavation in Gansu province. Archaeologists found a section of wall where the mortar contained human hair and fingernails, likely from migrants trying to claw their way through. Nearby, a child's skeleton was discovered with a silk pouch around its neck, still holding 7 copper coins. Historians matched these to exact tax amounts charged for crossing, proving families died just inches from salvation, their last coins insufficient. Perhaps the most haunting discovery was a collection of bamboo slips near Dunhuang, recounting a border captain's orders: "Let no man pass unless his purse outweighs his hunger." This wasn't defense, it was economic apartheid. The wall's stones were mortared with greed, and its shadow became a graveyard for those who believed the Silk Road promised survival. As we peel back these layers, the Great Wall transforms from a symbol of unity into a monument of exclusion, its foundations literally built on the bones of the dispossessed. And this ruthless calculus of profit over people would echo far beyond China's borders, as our next revelation shows. But hidden beneath the weight of the Great Wall's secrets lies another forgotten tragedy that stretches all the way to the heart of ancient Rome. Imagine this: 10,000 battle-hardened Roman legionnaires captured in one of history's most crushing defeats, vanishing into the east not as conquerors but as slaves on the Silk Road. The story begins at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 before the Common Era, where the mighty Parthian Empire annihilated Rome's legions, but the survivors didn't simply perish. Persian records describe columns of chained prisoners marched eastward, sold to Silk Road traders as exotic trophies. For decades, historians dismissed accounts of these lost Romans reaching China as legend until 2007, when DNA tests on mummies in Gansu province revealed startling genetic links to southern Europe. One particularly preserved blonde-haired man still wore fragments of a lamella vest, its design matching Roman cavalry armor. The artifacts tell an even darker tale. Chinese chronicles from the Han Dynasty mention a strange settlement called Lycian, where residents practiced foreign combat drills and built circular fortresses unlike any local design. Excavations there unearthed Roman-style buckles and a silver denarius coin repurposed as a pendant, proof these weren't just traders, but men clinging to their identity. Forensic analysis of mass graves near the site showed skeletons with healed gladius wounds and fused vertebrae from carrying heavy packs, confirming their forced march across thousands of miles. Most haunting are the personal remnants. Archaeologists found a bronze helmet near Dunhuang, its interior etched with Latin graffiti. Translated, it reads, "Marcus of the 10th Legion, if any Roman finds this, tell my son in Capua his father died facing east." Nearby, a child's skeleton buried with a terracotta figurine wore a bulla amulet, a Roman good luck charm suggesting some legionnaires lived long enough to raise families in captivity. This wasn't just human trafficking on an industrial scale. The Han court prized these prisoners for their military skills, stationing them as border guards against the very nomads they'd been sold by. The irony is crushing. Romans who once fought to expand their empire now defending China's. Their descendants lost to history until modern science whispered their truth from the bones. And as we'll soon see, the Silk Road's appetite for human suffering didn't stop at slavery. Its next horror would poison the land itself. Yet as brutal as the fate of Rome's lost legion was, the Silk Road's horrors took an even more insidious turn, one that seeped into the very earth. Deep in the mountains of Kyrgyzstan, archaeologists uncovered a nightmare disguised as progress. Ancient mercury mines so toxic, they turned entire towns into graveyards. The mercury trade began with a tantalizing promise: eternal life. Chinese alchemists of the Han Dynasty believed liquid mercury could purify the body, granting immortality to emperors. Obsessed with this idea, they demanded staggering quantities, fueling a deadly mining boom along the Silk Road's remote branches. But what they didn't realize was that their quest for everlasting life was poisoning everyone in its path. At the heart of this tragedy lies the Aktuz mines, where workers toiled in tunnels filled with mercury vapor. Excavations revealed skeletons still curled in agony, their bones riddled with lesions from chronic exposure. Forensic tests showed mercury levels 100 times higher than normal, confirming why even nearby settlements became ghost towns. A Tang Dynasty medical scroll found in the ruins warned of miners shaking like leaves, their teeth falling out, textbook symptoms of mercury poisoning. The victims weren't just miners. Silk Road merchants unwittingly spread the poison, carrying mercury in fragile ceramic flasks that often leaked. One caravan stop in Uzbekistan yielded a gruesome find: a group of mummified traders buried with their contaminated goods, their hair still streaked with telltale red mercury sulfide. Most chilling of all were the children. A mass grave near Kashgar held dozens of small skeletons with stunted growth and twisted limbs, generations born to parents whose bodies had absorbed the toxin. Ironically, those who sought mercury's power suffered most. Emperor Qin Shi Huang, who drank mercury potions daily, died at just 49, his tomb famously lined with rivers of the toxic metal. Alchemists' workshops along the route contained recipes for immortality pills, now identifiable as pure mercury sulfide. Modern tests on their remains show brain tissue so saturated it's preserved like leather. But the Silk Road's poison trail didn't end there. As we'll discover next, another substance once sold as medicine would ensnare empires in history's first drug wars. But the Silk Road's darkness wasn't confined to toxic metals or lost legions. Its routes also carried human suffering of a different kind, one hidden behind gilded cages and whispered rumors. Enter Qutayba ibn Muslim, an 8th century Turkic warlord whose name became synonymous with brutality and exploitation. Qutayba wasn't just a conqueror. He was a predator. As he expanded his empire across Central Asia, he built a network of spies to identify the most beautiful girls in every village. These weren't random abductions. They were calculated raids, meticulously documented in Arab chronicles that describe caravans transporting tribute to his desert fortress near Bukhara. But this so-called tribute was human cargo girls as young as 12, snatched from their families and paraded before Qutayba like livestock. Archaeologists unearthed the grim truth decades later. Beneath the ruins of his pleasure palace, they found golden cages, ornate but unmistakably prisons. Forensic analysis revealed layers of dried blood on the bars, along with scratched pleas for help in multiple languages. Even more chilling were the bones. Many showed signs of repeated fractures, healed badly, suggesting prolonged abuse. Yet Qutayba's crimes weren't secrets. They were an open terror. Persian poets wrote of villages where mothers dyed their daughters' hair with mud to make them unworthy of his scouts. Chinese diplomats, usually silent on such matters, noted in their reports that entire Silk Road towns paid bribes to avoid his raids. But the warlord's power was unchecked. When a group of Sogdian merchants protested, he had their tongues cut out and displayed their mutilated bodies at a bustling caravanserai as a warning. Perhaps most disturbing is how history repeated itself. Just last year, DNA tests linked a cluster of mummified remains near Samarkand to modern-day descendants in Afghanistan, proof that some of Qutayba's victims survived long enough to bear children. Their descendants still carry genetic markers from regions as far away as Greece and India, silent witnesses to a horror that spanned continents. The Silk Road didn't just trade silk and spices. It trafficked in human lives, leaving scars that last millennia. And as we'll see next, some of those scars were carved not by warlords but by blades wielded in shadow. But the horrors of the Silk Road weren't limited to warlords like Qutayba. Beneath the bustling trade routes lurked a far more calculated kind of killer, one who moved in silence, disguised as a merchant, with death tucked into the folds of his robes. This was the world of the Hashashin, the original architects of political murder, who turned the Silk Road into their personal highway of shadows. The Hashashin weren't just assassins. They were masters of deception, embedding themselves in caravans alongside spice traders and silk weavers. Their leader, Hassan I Sabah, famously operated from the impenetrable mountain fortress of Alamut, where recruits underwent brutal training. Historical accounts describe how initiates were drugged with hashish, hence their name, and awakened in a fake paradise to believe they were carrying out divine missions. But their true weapon wasn't intoxication. It was the Silk Road itself. Take the assassination of the Seljuk vizier Nizam al-Mulk in the year 1127. The vizier, a powerful statesman, had fortified his palace against knives and arrows, but he never suspected the bolt of Chinese silk delivered to his chambers as a diplomatic gift. Woven into the fabric was a toxin so potent that merely brushing against it caused his skin to blister. By nightfall, he was dead, his guards baffled by a murder weapon that vanished into thin air. Persian court scribes later discovered the truth: the silk had been treated with a slow-acting poison derived from Himalayan wolfsbane, a technique stolen from Indian alchemists. Training manuals recovered from Alamat reveal even darker details. Assassins were taught to mimic regional accents, forge merchant seals, and even alter their gaits to match the rhythms of different trade groups. One scroll instructs killers to move like the wind, unseen until the moment of striking, while another details how to lace wine with ground pearls, causing victims to hemorrhage internally. Their most chilling tactic, using children as carriers since their innocent faces drew no suspicion. The Hashishins' legacy lingers in modern espionage tactics, but their true innovation was exploiting the Silk Road's trust. Caravanserais, designed as safe havens for travelers, became hunting grounds. A friendly merchant offering figs might slip arsenic into your tea. A scribe trading manuscripts could be mapping your routines. Even Marco Polo's journals hint at encounters with phantom traders who disappeared after asking too many questions about noblemen's schedules. This was the Silk Road's darkest paradox. The same routes that spread knowledge and wealth also delivered death in plain sight. And as we'll uncover next, some secrets weren't carried by blades or poison, but by ink and parchment, twisting reality itself. But the Silk Road's dangers weren't just physical, they thrived in the realm of deception too. Imagine a world where the most powerful weapon wasn't a blade or poison, but a carefully crafted lie. Here, in the shadows of bustling markets and scriptoriums, the first fake news was born, weaponized by empires to manipulate minds and incite chaos. The Tang dynasty, for instance, spread wild tales of flying Persian demons infiltrating China's borders, their bodies allegedly covered in glowing symbols that could curse entire villages. These weren't just campfire stories, they were state-sponsored propaganda. Archaeologists have unearthed scrolls from the 8th century depicting these fantastical creatures, complete with instructions on how to identify them. The real target, Sogdian merchants, a thriving Central Asian community accused of witchcraft simply because their success threatened local trades. Forged edicts stamped with imperial seals urged citizens to purge the demon taint, sparking pogroms that wiped out entire Sogdian neighborhoods in cities like Chang'an. The techniques were shockingly modern. Silk Road forgers mastered the art of replicating official handwriting, even aging parchment with smoke and vinegar to pass scrutiny. One exposed scheme involved a fake treaty between the Byzantines and Tibetans, designed to provoke a war. The document claimed the Byzantines promised 10,000 pounds of gold to anyone who slaughtered Tibetan envoys, a lie so convincing it took 3 years for scholars to debunk. Compare this to today's deepfakes. Just as ancient scribes altered scrolls, modern algorithms manipulate videos to make politicians appear to say things they never did. The Silk Road's counterfeit edicts functioned like medieval Photoshop, splicing real seals onto fabricated text. A 9th century Persian governor, for example, was ousted after a fake love letter to a rival's wife surfaced, complete with his actual wax seal stolen from a mundane tax record. The most chilling parallel, both eras exploited trust. Silk Road travelers relied on handwritten letters of introduction, much like we trust verified social media badges today. But just as a verified account can spread disinformation now, a single forged Silk Road passport could smuggle a spy or an assassin into a king's court. And the consequences were equally devastating. When the Eigher Khaganate collapsed in the 9th century, historians found evidence that fake prophecies planted by rivals had convinced their leaders to abandon key alliances. Sound familiar? It's a reminder that while technology evolves, the human appetite for manipulation remains timeless. Up next, a horror that blurred the line between myth and reality. A plague so twisted, victims were said to chew their own flesh in madness. The Silk Road's zombie apocalypse wasn't just folklore. It was biochemistry gone wrong. But the darkest deceptions weren't just man-made. Nature itself played tricks on Silk Road travelers. As caravans climbed the high passes of the Pamir Mountains, some began reporting horrors straight out of nightmares. Tibetan manuscripts from the 11th century describe entire camps descending into madness, with merchants screaming about hungry ghosts tearing at their flesh. Survivors wrote of companions chewing their own fingers off, convinced their bodies were possessed. For centuries, these accounts were dismissed as superstition. Until modern science uncovered the terrifying truth, the culprit, a sinister hitchhiker in the grain sacks, ergot fungus, a mold that grows on damp rye bread, was a common stowaway in Silk Road shipments. When ingested, its toxins trigger violent hallucinations, convulsions, and a condition medieval doctors called St. Anthony's fire, a burning sensation so intense, victims would strip naked and run screaming into the snow. But the fungus did something even worse. It warped perception so severely that sufferers hallucinated their loved ones as demons, leading to documented cases of cannibalism along remote mountain routes. Forensic evidence proves this wasn't folklore. In 2014, archaeologists excavating a Karakoram way station found 6 mummified merchants with bite marks matching human teeth. Toxicology tests revealed ergot alkaloids in their stomachs at 50 times the lethal dose. One victim's journal, preserved in a bronze cylinder, described his final hours. The camels sprouted scorpion tails. Then my brother's face melted and his hands became hooks. I had to stop him before he stole my soul. The trade routes magnified the disaster. Caravans carrying infected grain would unknowingly spread the fungus to local villages where it contaminated fresh supplies. A single bad harvest could doom entire regions, like the 8th century cotton outbreak where survivors reported dancing skeletons in the streets. Modern historians now believe this was mass hysteria fueled by ergot poisoning, with entire towns seeing shared hallucinations. Even the wealthy weren't safe. A Sogdian merchant prince's tomb contained a warning inscription, "Beware the black bread that sings." Scientists analyzing residue in his food jars identified ergot compounds alongside opium, a deadly mix that may have sparked his court's infamous banquet of knives, where guests allegedly stabbed imaginary invaders for hours. This biochemical horror left one chilling legacy. Tibetan medical scrolls from the era depict treatments for grain madness, including tying patients to posts until the demons pass. But the real cure came too late. The Silk Road itself. As trade expanded, so did wheat varieties resistant to ergot, slowly starving the fungus out. Yet in those frozen mountain passes, the stones still whisper of caravans that never made it. Because sometimes the deadliest traps weren't laid by man or nature, but by a loaf of bread gone wrong. Coming up, an ancient scam that fooled emperors and knights alike. How half the Chinese silk treasured in Rome was actually an ingenious counterfeit. The Silk Road didn't just trade goods, it traded lies woven in threads. But beneath the shimmering surface of those coveted silk bolts lay one of history's greatest cons. Imagine paying a fortune for what you believed was the finest Chinese silk, only to discover it was an expertly crafted fake. Along the Silk Road, deception was woven into the very fabric of trade. Forensic studies of museum collections reveal a shocking truth. As much as 60% of so-called Chinese silk traded to Rome and Byzantium was actually counterfeit. Indian merchants, masters of textile alchemy, produced near-perfect replicas using wild silkworms and clever dye techniques. These knockoffs were so convincing even emperors were fooled. Byzantine legal codes from the 6th century prescribed crucifixion for traders caught selling fake silk, yet the scam persisted for centuries. How did they pull it off? Microscopic analysis of surviving fragments shows the telltale signs. Authentic Chinese silk produced by domesticated Bomix mori silkworms has fibers of uniform thickness and a distinctive pearlescent sheen. The Indian fakes, spun from wild antheria moths, had slightly rougher threads and irregular weaving patterns masked by plant-based glosses. Some counterfeits even used layers of rice starch to mimic silk's legendary smoothness until the first rain washed the disguise away. The consequences were catastrophic for middlemen. A letter from a Sogdian merchant preserved in the dry sands of Turpan begs forgiveness from his Persian buyer. The dragon robes unraveled in the vizier's bathhouse. "They are coming for my head." Archaeologists found his skeleton in a well with weights still tied to the ankles, a grim echo of Byzantine justice. Ironically, the counterfeit trade birthed innovations. Indian weavers developed resist-dyeing methods now known as bandhani, and their wild silk was more durable than Chinese varieties, but prestige trumped practicality. When Taklamakan received what he thought was a Chinese tribute of silk in 800, his scribes rhapsodized about its heavenly glow. Modern spectral imaging proved it was dyed Indian tussar, a revelation that rewrote European accounts of diplomatic gifts. The greatest insult, some fake silks became more valuable than originals. A 9th century Baghdad customs scroll lists Indian imitations at double the price of Chinese imports because their vibrant colors didn't fade. In the end, the Silk Road's most enduring lesson might be this: deception, once mastered, becomes its own form of genius. And speaking of illusions, our next revelation uncovers how the Mongols turned Silk Road commerce into history's first documented bioweapon catapulting plague victims into besieged cities. The Silk Road didn't just move goods, it moved death on an industrial scale. Now, shifting our focus to a haunting intersection of ancient trade and modern devastation, we uncover a chilling chapter of the Silk Road that remained buried until the nuclear age. Deep in Mongolia's remote steppes lies a place locals call the Valley of the Black Cauldrons, where Soviet atomic tests in the mid-20th century unearthed a forgotten secret: the Silk Road's hidden trade in uranium. When mushroom clouds illuminated the night sky during Soviet nuclear tests, something unexpected happened. The explosions revealed ancient Silk Road artifacts buried beneath the sand, now eerily glowing under ultraviolet light. These weren't ordinary relics. Scientists identified them as uranium glass beads and pottery shards, once traded along the route as exotic curiosities. Historical records from Persian alchemists describe this material as the night sun stone, prized for its mysterious luminescence. But what these medieval merchants didn't realize was they were handling raw danger. The consequences linger to this day. Nomadic herders in the region have long reported deformed livestock, lambs born with extra limbs, cows with translucent skin mirroring radiation sickness documented near Chernobyl. Modern Geiger counter readings in the valley show radiation levels 300 times higher than normal, concentrated along ancient caravan trails. Soviet scientists who first surveyed the area in the 1960s found Silk Road coins fused together by centuries of slow radioactive decay, proving uranium wasn't just traded here, it was processed. Interviews with Mongolian elders reveal even darker folklore. One shepherd recounted a legend passed down through generations. The Black Cauldrons were not made by men but by demons who punished greedy merchants. Archaeologists now believe these cauldrons were actually lead-lined containers for uranium ore, abandoned when traders grew sick after handling them. Soil samples from medieval mining pits near Samarkand confirm the presence of yellowcake uranium, the same material used in modern nuclear reactors, the most disturbing find. A Tang Dynasty medical scroll discovered in Dunhuang describes symptoms identical to radiation poisoning: hair loss, bleeding gums, and skin that sloughs off like silk. It prescribes powdered jade as a cure, proving Silk Road healers encountered this invisible killer long before Marie Curie. Today, the valley remains a no-go zone, its poisoned earth a silent testament to history's first nuclear trade. And as we'll see next, this wasn't the only time the Silk Road became a vector for catastrophe. When empires chose profit over people, the results were apocalyptic. But the horror didn't stop with radioactive secrets. As we peel back another layer of the Silk Road's grim legacy, we uncover something even more sinister: history's first orchestrated pandemic cover-up. The Yuan dynasty, desperate to keep the Silk Road's lucrative trade routes open, made a ruthless decision. When the plague began decimating caravans in the 14th century, they didn't sound the alarm. Instead, they burned the evidence. Imperial decrees from the Yuan capital of Dadu, modern-day Beijing, ordered the destruction of all medical records mentioning black boils or sudden death. Silk Road way station logs from the period mysteriously skip entire months, their pages torn out or smudged with ink, but the truth couldn't stay buried forever. 600 years later, archaeologists unsealed a hidden Ming Dynasty archive containing a shocking admission. A report to the emperor confessed half the road is bones. The other half walk as if already dead. The parallels to modern times are chilling. Just as the Yuan dynasty silenced doctors to protect trade, 2020 World Health Organization emails later revealed Chinese officials downplayed COVID-19 spread in its early days. Both crises followed the same deadly pattern: governments prioritizing commerce over containment, letting plagues gain unstoppable momentum along the very routes that brought them wealth. Forensic linguists studying Yuan-era merchant letters found eerie censorship tactics. Writers used code words like faded silk for plague victims and spoiled spices for contaminated goods. Meanwhile, Ming physicians secretly documented the aftermath. One scroll depicts a caravan where every 10th camel bore a corpse, their faces eaten away as if by invisible worms. Modern pathology confirms this matches bubonic plague's necrosis. Perhaps the most damning evidence comes from the ground itself. Mass graves along the Hexi corridor show plague victims buried with their mouths sewn shut, a grim warning from authorities to keep silent. Others were tossed into wells, poisoning water sources for decades. Today, these sites test positive for Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium that caused the Black Death. The lesson is bone-chilling. When trade becomes more valued than truth, history doesn't just repeat itself, it escalates. And as we'll soon see, the Silk Road's darkest experiments didn't end with pandemics. Some secrets were buried alive, but even the horrors of pandemic cover-ups pale in comparison to what came next, a hidden chapter of the Silk Road where human lives became disposable test subjects. Enter the era of the Silk Road's darkest science, where medicine crossed into monstrosity. At the heart of this nightmare stood Abu Bakr al-Razi, a brilliant but ruthless Persian surgeon who turned caravanserais into his twisted laboratories. 10th century manuscripts from Baghdad describe how al-Razi would purchase sick or injured travelers from slave markets under the guise of charity, only to subject them to unimaginable experiments. One surviving scroll details his tests with an early form of anesthesia. A lethal cocktail of opium and henbane dripped onto prisoners' exposed brains while they remained conscious. The evidence is etched in parchment and bone. A surgical manual looted from a Samarkand library shows detailed illustrations of live dissections, with captions coldly noting how long subjects survived after organ removal. One diagram depicts a chained man's intestines being measured while he watched, the artist meticulously recording the 12 gasps before death. These weren't isolated atrocities. Merchants' ledgers from the period list payments for strong test subjects alongside spices and silks, proving human experimentation was a clandestine trade. The parallels to modern horrors are inescapable. Just as Japan's Unit 731 would later dissect living prisoners in World War II, al-Razi's methods followed the same depraved logic. Both used marginalized people, whether enslaved travelers or war prisoners, as expendable raw material. Both kept precise clinical records of suffering. A recently discovered cache of al-Razi's tools near Bukhara contained scalpels with grooves to collect spinal fluid from conscious victims, eerily resembling the icebreaker syringes used by Unit 731 surgeons. Perhaps most chilling are the recovery experiments described in a Damascus medical text. Al-Razi would deliberately infect subjects with diseases traded along the Silk Road, leprosy, dysentery, even bubonic plague, then test experimental cures. One account describes 30 travelers force-fed mercury to treat syphilis, their jaws wired shut to prevent vomiting. Archaeologists found their mass grave in Turkmenistan in 2012, the skeleton's teeth still glowing with toxic levels of quicksilver. The Silk Road didn't just transport goods, it trafficked in human agony. And as we'll soon discover, even these experiments were merely prelude to a final banquet of brutality that would shock the ancient world. But the darkest feast in Silk Road history was yet to come, a banquet where the line between man and monster vanished entirely. In the year 207, warlord Dong Zhuo, the tyrannical ruler of China's later Han Dynasty, hosted a dinner that would become legendary for its unspeakable cruelty. Historical records from the Book of Later Han describe how Dong Zhuo, fresh from crushing a rebellion along the Silk Road's eastern routes, marched hundreds of captured merchants and diplomats into his palace at Luoyang. What followed wasn't just execution, it was orchestrated horror disguised as hospitality. Archaeologists digging at Dong Zhuo's former stronghold in 2019 uncovered a kitchen buried beneath collapsed walls. The pottery shards told a grim story. Carbon residue analysis revealed human fat mixed with barley wine in serving jugs, while butcher knives bore protein traces matching Silk Road travelers' DNA. Most chilling, a bronze cauldron stamped with Dong Zhuo's seal still contained gelatinized bone broth. Modern testing confirmed it was human collagen from at least 6 individuals. Survivor accounts preserved in Buddhist monastery scrolls describe the feast's twisted theatrics. Prisoners were dressed as servants and forced to carve roasts from their own executed comrades, unaware they were handling human flesh until Dong Zhuo revealed the truth mid-meal. One account from a Persian trader spared for his storytelling skills recounts how the warlord laughed as guests vomited, saying, "You barbarians call us civilized. Tonight you dine as equals with your enemy's flesh between your teeth." The psychological warfare was deliberate. By forcing Silk Road elites to unknowingly commit cannibalism, Dong Zhuo aimed to break their cultural taboos and their will to resist. Forensic anthropologists note that many victims' bones show precise carving marks identical to mutton preparation techniques described in contemporary cookbooks. This wasn't random savagery, it was a calculated message written in meat and marrow. Perhaps most disturbing is how this horror echoed along the trade routes. Within decades, similar accounts emerged from Parthian warlords and Kushan kings, suggesting Dong Zhuo's banquet diplomacy became a dark template. Even today, Silk Road descendant communities in Xinjiang whisper warnings about the emperor who turned guests into garnish, a grisly reminder that history's darkest feasts never truly leave the table. But beneath the sands of time, the Silk Road's shadows stretch further than we ever imagined. The final dark truth is this: those ancient trade routes never truly vanished. They simply shed their silks and spices, morphing into the sinister underbelly of modern globalization. Forensic cartographers have made a chilling discovery. When you overlay maps of today's heroin smuggling routes from Afghanistan with 14th century opium caravan paths, they align with 90% accuracy. Those same mountain passes where Marco Polo heard whispers of slave traders now echo with the cries of human trafficking victims. Take the Karakoram Highway, once the Silk Road's lifeline through the Himalayas. In 2019, Pakistani authorities intercepted a truckload of textiles near Gilgit. Hidden beneath the fabric were 73 women and children bound for illegal adoption rings in China. Their transport method, the same network of way stations used by medieval slave traders, now rebranded as roadside motels. Even the payment systems mirror antiquity. Where merchants once used silver ingots, traffickers now move cryptocurrency through apps named after Silk Road cities like Samarkand Pay. Archaeologist Zhang Wei's team made a breakthrough in 2022 when they dusted off 8th century Sogdian merchant ledgers from a Tajik cave. The cargo lists read like a modern crime report, code words for narcotics disguised as medicinal powders, human captives labeled as porcelain dolls. Compare that to a 2023 Europol seizure where methamphetamine was shipped as Mongolian herbal tea in camel hair pouches identical to those found in Turpan tombs. History isn't repeating, it never stopped. The most damning evidence comes from satellite thermal imaging. Nighttime heat signatures along the old Silk Road reveal suspicious activity peaks between 1 and 4 a.m., the exact hours historical records show caravans moving to avoid authorities. From the Taklamakan to the Mediterranean, these ghost routes still pulse with illicit trade. A UN report confirmed that 80% of Central Asian human trafficking victims are transported along roads built over 2,000 years ago, their captors using the same evasion tactics as ancient slavers, false oasis markers, bribed border guards, even drugged water supplies. So what does this mean for us today? Those crumbling caravanserais weren't just waypoints for history, they were blueprints. When you see news about fentanyl shipments or disappeared refugees, you're witnessing the Silk Road's final secret, that the lines between past and present are drawn in the same blood-stained sand. The real horror isn't how much has changed, but how little. This is why we must listen when the desert wind carries echoes of the past, not as relics but as warnings. If you found these revelations as unsettling as I did, smash that like button and subscribe, because understanding history's darkest patterns isn't just about the past, it's about recognizing them when they resurface in our own world. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next chapter of history's untold stories. The Silk Road was never just a path for silk and spices. It was a living artery of human ambition, pumping both brilliance and brutality across continents. For centuries, this network connected empires, spread ideas, and fueled progress, but at a price we're still reckoning with today. The same routes that carried papermaking and gunpowder to the West also delivered plagues and slaves. The caravanserais that housed scholars and poets doubled as black markets for narcotics and stolen lives. This duality is the Silk Road's true legacy, a mirror held up to our own era of globalization, where convenience and cruelty still travel hand in hand. Consider this unsettling parallel. Just as medieval merchants labeled human beings as porcelain to disguise their cargo, modern traffickers use terms like agricultural workers to mask exploitation. The Silk Road's shadow lingers in the algorithms of dark web marketplaces, where digital coins replace silver ingots but the trade remains the same. Even our rush for rare minerals today echoes the desperate hunger for jade and mercury that once drove kings to ruin. The Taklamakan sands have shifted, but the patterns beneath them stay frozen in time. So as we close this chapter, ask yourself, what lies beneath the glossy surface of our global supply chains? The Silk Road teaches us that progress rarely comes without victims, whether it's the convicts who died building its roads or the factory workers invisible in our smartphone assembly lines. Those mummified traders clutching their ledgers in the desert weren't just casualties of their age. They were canaries in history's coal mine, warning us how easily trade becomes tyranny. If these revelations resonated with you, let's keep the conversation alive. Drop a comment below. What modern-day Silk Road secrets do you think future historians will uncover? Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because the past has more lessons to teach us. Until next time, remember, every golden age leaves bones in its wake. The question is, whose bones will ours